The river roared like a beast unleashed from its cage, brown water churning with deadly force as Adelaide Davis clung desperately to a branch that threatened to snap with each violent surge. The flash flood had come without warning, sweeping through the narrow canyon with merciless power, transforming the once gentle stream into a raging torrent that had already dragged her nearly a quarter-mile from where her wagon had overturned. "Help!" she screamed, though her voice seemed pathetically small against the thunderous water. The spring of 1878 had brought unexpected rains to the Arizona Territory, turning dry washes into death traps for the unwary. Adelaide's journey to join her aunt in Prescott had turned into a nightmare when the waters rose with terrifying speed, sweeping away her driver and the mules before she could even comprehend what was happening. The branch cracked ominously. Adelaide's fingers, numb with cold and slick with water, began to lose their grip. She was 22 years old, and in this moment, she was certain she wouldn't see 23. The water pulled at her skirts, threatening to drag her down into its murky depths. With a final, splintering crack, the branch gave way, and Adelaide screamed as the current seized her once more. The roaring in her ears became deafening as she fought to keep her head above water, gasping and choking when waves slapped against her face. She thought of her parents, both gone from typhoid last winter, of the aunt she'd never meet, of all the dreams that would die with her in this God-forsaken wilderness. Then, cutting through her panic, she heard its hoofbeats, pounding hard and fast along the riverbank. A voice called out, deep and commanding even over the water's rage. "Hold on. I'm coming." Adelaide caught a glimpse of a horse and rider moving parallel to the current, a flash of determined motion against the blur of trees and rocks. The rider was pushing his mount hard, leaping over obstacles, racing ahead of her downstream path. She lost sight of him as the river bent sharply around a rocky outcropping, her body tumbling painfully against submerged stones. When she rounded the bend, gasping for breath, she saw him again. The horseman had dismounted at a point where the river narrowed slightly, his tall form poised at the water's edge. He held a rope in his hands, and as Adelaide was swept toward him, he shouted, "Grab it! Grab the rope!" With the last of her strength, Adelaide lunged for the lifeline as it slapped the water near her. Her fingers closed around the rough hemp, and she held on as the current tried to tear it from her grasp. The man on shore braced himself, muscles straining visibly as he fought the river for her life. For agonizing seconds, it seemed the water might win, might snap the rope or pull him in two. Then, incrementally, he began to haul her toward the bank. "That's it," he called encouragingly. "Hold tight, I've got you." When Adelaide's body finally scraped against the riverbank, strong hands seized her arms, dragging her from the water's clutches. She collapsed onto muddy ground, coughing and retching, barely aware of the stranger kneeling beside her. "You're safe now, miss. You're safe." Adelaide looked up through dripping strands of dark blonde hair at her rescuer. His face was partly shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes the color of a summer sky. He couldn't have been more than 30, with broad shoulders straining against a soaked cotton shirt. Thank you," she managed between chattering teeth. "Name's Holt Vance," he said, shrugging out of his duster and wrapping it around her trembling shoulders. "And getting you warm is more important than pleasantries right now." Before Adelaide could respond, Holt lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing, carrying her to where his horse stood waiting. The animal, a magnificent chestnut with a white blaze, snorted nervously, still skittish from the chaos of the rescue. "Easy, Thunder," Holt murmured to the horse. "This lady's had enough excitement for one day." Adelaide felt herself being lifted onto the saddle, her sodden skirts making the process awkward. Holt swung up behind her, one strong arm securing her against his chest as he took the reins with his free hand. "My wagon," she said weakly. "My things." "Gone," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "The river took everything except you, and you're lucky it didn't take you too." As the horse picked its way carefully from the riverbank, Adelaide felt the enormity of her situation settle upon her like a physical weight. She was alive, but everything she owned had been swept away. She was a stranger in a dangerous land, dependent on a man she'd just met. The realization brought a fresh wave of shivers that had nothing to do with her wet clothing. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. "My ranch isn't far," Holt answered. "You can rest there, get dry. Tomorrow we'll figure out what's next." Adelaide nodded, too exhausted to argue or question further. The rhythmic motion of the horse beneath her and the solid presence of the man behind her lulled her into a state of numb acceptance. The landscape blurred around her scrubby juniper and pine, red rock formations catching the late afternoon light. The river gradually receding behind them as they climbed to higher ground. After what seemed both an eternity and no time at all, a small ranch house came into view, nestled in a protected valley with mountains rising behind it. A corral stood to one side, several horses raising their heads with interest as thunder approached. A curl of smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting warmth within. "It's not much," Holt said apologetically, "but it's solid and dry." He helped Adelaide down from the horse, steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. The events of the day had drained her completely, and she leaned heavily against him as they approached the house. The door swung open before they reached it, and an older man with a weathered face and silver-streaked hair stepped out, concern etched into the lines around his eyes. "What in tarnation? Holt, who's this?" "Woman caught in the flood, Ray," Holt explained tersely. "Need to get her warm." The man called Ray stepped aside immediately, holding the door wide. "Get her in by the fire. I'll put on coffee." The interior of the ranch house was simple but clean, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall of the main room. Wooden furniture, sturdy and practical, was arranged to take advantage of the hearth's warmth. Holt guided Adelaide to a rocking chair close to the flames. "Ray's my foreman," he explained as the older man bustled about, setting a kettle on the stove. "Been with me since I started this place." Adelaide nodded, her teeth still chattering despite the fire's warmth. Her sodden clothes clung uncomfortably, and her hair hung in dripping ropes down her back. Holt frowned, noticing her condition. "You need dry clothes." He disappeared briefly, returning with a bundle of fabric. "These are mine, so they'll be too big, but they're clean and dry." Ray cleared his throat pointedly. "I'll check on the stock," he said, making a tactful exit through the front door. Left alone with her rescuer, Adelaide felt a sudden wave of shyness. Where can I change?" Holt gestured to a door on the far side of the room. "My bedroom, take your time. There's a towel for your hair, too." In the small, Spartan bedroom, Adelaide peeled off her ruined dress and undergarments with difficulty, her fingers still clumsy from cold. The men's clothing Holt had provided, a flannel shirt and cotton trousers, swam on her frame, but felt blessedly warm and dry. She toweled her hair as best she could, combing through the tangles with her fingers. When she emerged, Holt had changed as well, now wearing a dry shirt and pants similar to those he'd given her. He stood by the stove, pouring coffee into thick mugs. "You look better," he said, offering her a cup. "The color's coming back to your face." Adelaide accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "I never properly introduced myself. I'm Adelaide Davis. I was traveling to Prescott to live with my aunt when the flood came." Adelaide, Holt repeated, as if testing the name. Were you traveling alone? No. There was a driver, Mr. Lewis. Her voice caught. I saw the water take him, the mules too. It happened so fast. Holt's expression sobered. I'm sorry. The desert can turn deadly in minutes when the rains come. Folks not used to it often don't recognize the signs until it's too late. How did you know? How did you find me? He gestured toward the window, where the last light of day was fading. I was checking fence lines up on the ridge when I saw the water coming, heard your shouts. Pure luck I was there. Not luck, Adelaide said softly. Providence. A small smile touched Holt's lips, softening his features. Maybe so. Ray returned, stomping his boots on the porch before entering. He nodded approvingly at Adelaide's improved condition. I've got some stew warming. Figure the lady could use some hot food. The simple meal of venison stew and cornbread was perhaps the most delicious thing Adelaide had ever tasted, or perhaps it was just the knowledge that she was alive to taste it at all. As they ate, she found herself studying Holt Vance more carefully. He was handsome in a rugged way, with sun-browned skin and laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his current serious demeanor indicated. His hands were calloused and strong, a working man's hands, but he handled his utensils with unexpected grace. How long have you had this ranch? She asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Coming up on 5 years now, Holt replied. Came out from Texas after the war with not much more than thunder and dreams. Found this valley, built the house with Ray's help. Been adding to it bit by bit ever since. He's being modest, Ray interjected. This spread's one of the finest in the territory for its size. Holt's got an eye for good horseflesh and the patience to train them right. Holt looked embarrassed by the praise. We get by. After dinner, exhaustion hit Adelaide like a physical blow. She tried to stifle a yawn, but Holt noticed immediately. You need rest, he said, rising from the table. You can take my bed, I'll bunk out here. Adelaide began to protest, but he held up a hand. No arguments, you've been through enough today, morning soon enough to figure out next steps. Too tired to argue further, Adelaide nodded gratefully. In the bedroom, she slid beneath clean, if rough, sheets, the events of the day playing in her mind like scenes from a strange dream. The last thought she had before sleep claimed her was of strong arms pulling her from the raging water, of blue eyes filled with concern, of a voice saying, I've got you. Morning brought clarity and with it, the full realization of her predicament. Adelaide woke to sunlight streaming through a small window, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day crashed back, bringing with them a wave of grief for what she'd lost and gratitude for her survival. She rose and dressed in her borrowed clothes, finger-combing her hair as best she could before venturing into the main room. Holt was already up, stoking the fire while coffee percolated on the stove. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, offering a tentative smile. Morning. Sleep well. Better than I had any right to, she admitted. Thank you again for your hospitality. Coffee's almost ready. Ray's gone to check if the road to town is passable after yesterday's flood. Adelaide nodded, settling into a chair at the rough-hewn table. Mr. Vance, Holt, please. Holt. I need to get to Prescott as soon as possible. My aunt is expecting me, and after yesterday, she'll be worried when I don't arrive. He poured coffee for both of them, his movements methodical. The road to Prescott crosses 3 washes that would have flooded yesterday. Even if they're down now, the mud will make traveling difficult for a few days. Adelaide's heart sank. But I have nothing, no clothes, no money. Everything was in my trunk. We'll figure something out, Holt said calmly. First things first, Ray will send a telegram to your aunt when he reaches town, letting her know you're safe. As for clothes and such, Mrs. Jenkins at the general store is about your size. I'm sure she can help." His practical approach was reassuring. Adelaide sipped her coffee, studying him over the rim of her mug. In the clear light of morning, she could see details she'd missed the night before: a small scar at his temple, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. "You've been very kind to a complete stranger," she said. Holt shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable with the praise. "Out here we help each other. It's the only way to survive. Still, I'm grateful, and I'll find a way to repay your kindness once I reach my aunt's. No need for that." He rose, checking something simmering in a pot on the stove. "Hungry? It's just porridge, I'm afraid." They ate in companionable silence, the early morning light strengthening outside the windows. Adelaide found herself oddly content in this simple moment, despite all that had happened. There was something calming about Holt Vance's presence, a steadiness that made her feel safe. The sound of hoofbeats announced Ray's return. He burst through the door with unusual energy, his weather-beaten face alight with news. "Road to town's clear enough for wagons," he reported, helping himself to coffee. "But I've got news, and it ain't all good." Holt's expression sharpened. "What happened?" "Telegraph lines are down from the storm. No way to send a message to the ladies' people in Prescott." Ray turned to Adelaide apologetically. "And there's more. Seems the stage ain't running for at least a week. Last one got caught in the same flood that took you, miss. Driver made it out, but they lost a horse and cracked an axle." Adelaide felt the weight of this news settle over her. A week stranded with no way to contact her aunt. "What will I do?" she murmured, more to herself than the men. Holt exchanged a look with Ray before speaking. "You'll stay here until it's safe to travel," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We've got the space, and it's the sensible thing to do." "I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition," he interrupted gently. "Besides, where else would you go?" Put that way, Adelaide had to acknowledge the logic of his offer. She had no money, no other acquaintances in the territory. "If you're certain." "I am," he nodded to Ray. "Did you check with Mrs. Jenkins about clothes?" Ray grinned, reaching into his saddlebag. "Got ahead of you there, boss. Explained the situation, and she sent along some necessities." He handed Adelaide a small bundle. "Said it ain't much, but it'll do until proper arrangements can be made." Touched by this kindness from another stranger, Adelaide blinked back sudden tears. "Please thank her for me." "You can thank her yourself," Holt said. "We'll ride into town tomorrow, see about getting you some proper clothes and maybe finding someone headed toward Prescott who could carry a message." The plan made, Adelaide spent the remainder of the day adjusting to her temporary home. The bundle from Mrs. Jenkins contained a simple calico dress, undergarments, and a few toiletries, basic necessities that felt like luxuries after her ordeal. Holt showed her around the ranch, a modest but well-maintained property with a small herd of cattle and a corral of horses that were clearly his pride and joy. "Most ranchers in these parts focus on cattle," he explained as they leaned against the corral fence, watching a magnificent black stallion prance around the enclosure. "But horses have always been my passion. I breed and train them for sale, mostly to the army and stagecoach companies." "They're beautiful," Adelaide said, admiring the powerful animals. "Did you always work with horses?" A shadow crossed Holt's face. "No, I was studying to be a doctor before the war, after Gettysburg." He trailed off, his gaze distant. "Some dreams don't survive certain experiences." Adelaide sensed the weight of unspoken history in his words. "I'm sorry." He shook off the moment of melancholy with visible effort. "Nothing to be sorry for. Life takes unexpected turns, that's all. Sometimes they lead to better places than we planned. As the day progressed, Adelaide observed the easy rhythm of ranch life. Ray oversaw two younger hands who appeared for the afternoon's work, while Holt moved from task to task with quiet competence. She insisted on helping with dinner preparations, unwilling to be merely a guest when there was work to be done. "My mother would be scandalized if I didn't make myself useful," she explained, rolling up the sleeves of her borrowed shirt to knead bread dough. Holt watched her with amusement. "Where are you from originally, Adelaide?" "St. Louis," she replied, working the dough with practiced motions. "My father was a merchant. We lived comfortably, not extravagantly. When he and my mother died last winter, there wasn't much left after the debts were paid. My Aunt Martha, my mother's sister, offered me a home." "I'm sorry about your parents," Holt said quietly. Adelaide nodded, focusing on the dough to hide the sudden moisture in her eyes. "It was quick, at least. Typhoid swept through our neighborhood." She cleared her throat. "What about your family?" "Gone, mostly," he answered, his tone matter-of-fact rather than sorrowful. "Father died when I was young. Mother remarried, moved to California with her new husband. I have a half-sister somewhere in San Francisco I've never met. After the war, I needed open spaces, room to breathe." As evening fell, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. The air was cooling rapidly, the desert's dramatic temperature shift bringing a chill that made Adelaide grateful for the shawl Mrs. Jenkins had included in her package. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Different from anything I've known, but beautiful in its own way." Holt nodded, his profile strong against the fading light. "The territory gets in your blood. Most who come planning to leave end up staying. Is that what happened to you?" A small smile curved his lips. "Something like that. Came through with a cattle drive, fell in love with this valley, scraped together enough to put a down payment on the land. Never looked back." They lapsed into comfortable silence as darkness claimed the landscape, stars emerging in a display more brilliant than Adelaide had ever witnessed. The vastness of the sky made her feel small, yet somehow connected to something greater than herself. "Tomorrow we'll head to town after breakfast," Holt said eventually. "It's a rough place, but the people are good at heart." Adelaide nodded, suddenly aware of how close they sat, of the warm strength of his presence beside her. It was a strange feeling. She barely knew this man, yet felt a connection to him that defied rational explanation. Perhaps it was simply gratitude, she told herself, or the intensity of their first meeting. Whatever it was, she found herself reluctant to bid him good night when the time came. Sleep eluded her for a time as she lay in Holt's bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night. Her thoughts drifted to what might have happened had he not been there to pull her from the river, to the random chance that had placed him in the right position to see her plight. Life and death, separated by mere moments and the quick action of a stranger. Morning brought the promised trip to town. Adelaide wore the calico dress from Mrs. Jenkins, grateful to feel like a proper woman again despite the garment's simplicity. Holt had saddled a gentle mare for her, helping her mount with steady hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. "Thunder might be faster, but Daisy here has better manners," he explained with a grin that transformed his serious face. The ride to town took just under an hour, following a winding trail through rocky terrain that gradually opened to a wider valley. Adelaide was still getting accustomed to riding astride rather than side saddle, but found herself enjoying the experience despite some initial discomfort. The settlement that Holt called Cedar Creek was little more than a single dusty street lined with wooden buildings in various states of repair. A general store, saloon, blacksmith, small hotel, and a handful of other establishments comprised the entire town. People stopped their activities to watch as Holt and Adelaide rode in, curiosity evident in their stares. "Don't mind them," Holt murmured as they dismounted in front of the general store. "New faces are always an event around here, especially pretty ones." The compliment brought unexpected warmth to Adelaide's cheeks. Before she could respond, the store's door opened, and a plump, pleasant-faced woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Holt Vance, you brought her." "Oh, you poor dear," she exclaimed, enveloping Adelaide in a surprisingly strong embrace. "Ray told me what happened. Such a terrible ordeal. I'm Martha Jenkins." "Adelaide Davis," she replied, somewhat overwhelmed by the enthusiastic greeting. "Thank you for the clothes, they're a godsend." "Pish. Barely adequate, I'd say." Come in, come in. We'll find you some proper things." Inside the store, Mrs. Jenkins proved to be a whirlwind of efficiency, pulling ready-made dresses from shelves and holding them against Adelaide to check the fit while maintaining a steady stream of conversation. Holt excused himself to attend to other business in town, promising to return in an hour. Left alone with the shopkeeper, Adelaide found herself the subject of gentle but thorough questioning about her background, her journey, and her rescue. "Never known Holt to bring a woman to town before, Mrs." Jenkins commented as she helped Adelaide try on a blue gingham dress. "Keeps to himself, that one. Has since he arrived." "He's been very kind," Adelaide said carefully, unsure how to respond to the implied curiosity. Mrs. Jenkins smiled knowingly. "Kind, yes. And handsome too, though he doesn't seem to know it. Lost something in that war, like so many did. Not just on the outside, inside, where it matters." Adelaide thought of the shadow that had crossed Holt's face when he mentioned his abandoned medical studies. "He said he was at Gettysburg." The older woman nodded solemnly. "Was a field surgeon's assistant, from what I've heard. Saw things no young man should see. Came west like many, looking for a fresh start." This new information added depth to Adelaide's understanding of her rescuer. She tried to imagine Holt amid the chaos and carnage of battle, using the same strong hands that had pulled her from the river to try to save wounded soldiers. By the time Holt returned, Adelaide had acquired 2-day dresses, a more formal outfit for church or social occasions, appropriate undergarments, and various necessities. Mrs. Jenkins had been generous with her pricing, waving away Adelaide's concerns about payment. "Holt's good credit extends to you, dear. You can settle accounts when your situation improves." Outside the store, Adelaide found Holt in conversation with a tall, distinguished-looking man in a black coat. They broke off their discussion as she approached. "Adelaide, this is Judge Harmon," Holt introduced. "He's heading to Prescott next week when the stage resumes. He's offered to carry a letter to your aunt." Relief flooded through her. "That's wonderful news, thank you, Judge." The older man tipped his hat. "My pleasure, Miss Davis." Holtz explained your circumstances. "A most harrowing experience." "Judge Harmon has also invited us to dinner at the hotel," Holt added. "Said his wife would appreciate female company for a change." The meal proved to be a pleasant affair with Mrs. Harmon, a cultured woman some years younger than her husband, clearly delighted to have another woman to converse with. The hotel dining room, while modest by Eastern standards, offered surprisingly good food and a chance for Adelaide to observe Holt in a social setting. He was more reserved than in private, she noticed, but respectful and well-spoken. The judge and his wife clearly held him in high regard, treating him as an equal despite the differences in their stations. Several times during the meal, Adelaide caught Holt watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, his blue eyes thoughtful. After dining, they took their leave, as Holt wanted to return to the ranch before dark. The ride back was companionable, with Adelaide sharing her impressions of the townsfolk. Mrs. Jenkins was very kind, and the Harmons, they seemed almost out of place in such a rough settlement. Holt nodded, guiding Thunder around a rocky outcropping. The judge came to establish law in the territory. His wife's from Boston originally. She's adapted better than most Easterners. Like you hope I might? Adelaide asked, hearing the implied comparison. He glanced at her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I wouldn't presume to guess what you might do, Miss Davis. You've already shown more grit than most men I know, surviving that flood. The compliment pleased her more than it should have. As they rode, the setting sun gilded the landscape, turning ordinary rock and scrub into something magical. Adelaide found herself wanting to commit every detail to memory: the play of light on distant ridges, the scent of sage and dust, the steady rhythm of hooves on hard-packed earth. Back at the ranch, Ray had prepared a simple supper, eyeing their packages with interest as they unloaded them. The evening passed pleasantly, with talk turning to ranch business and local happenings. Adelaide, feeling more at ease in her new surroundings, contributed to the conversation when appropriate but mostly listened, learning about this unfamiliar world. The next several days fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Adelaide, determined not to be a burden, insisted on taking on household tasks. She cleaned the small ranch house more thoroughly than it had likely been since its construction, prepared meals that were a significant improvement over the men's basic cooking, and even tackled the mending that had accumulated. Holt, initially resistant to her efforts, soon accepted them with good grace. The place hasn't looked this good since. Well, ever, he admitted on the fourth evening, surveying the now spotless main room with its newly arranged furniture and curtains fashioned from feed sacks. A woman's touch was clearly needed, she replied lightly. Something flickered in his eyes, a momentary vulnerability quickly masked. It was indeed. They settled into a pattern of shared meals and evening conversations on the porch, watching the sunset. Adelaide found herself looking forward to these quiet moments, when Holt would relax enough to share stories of his early days in the territory, or listen to her tales of life in St. Louis. There was an ease between them that grew with each passing day, a mutual respect that gradually deepened into genuine affection. On her fifth day at the ranch, Holt offered to teach her to ride properly. If you're going to be in the territory for any length of time, you should know how to handle a horse confidently, he explained, helping her adjust her seat in the saddle. The lesson took place in the corral, with Daisy patiently tolerating Adelaide's awkward attempts to master the proper posture and commands. Holt was a patient teacher, his instructions clear and encouraging. When his hands occasionally guided hers on the reins or adjusted her position, Adelaide found herself acutely aware of his touch, of the strength and gentleness combined in his calloused fingers. "You're a natural," he said approvingly as she completed a circuit of the corral at a controlled trot. Adelaide laughed, flushed with accomplishment and the exertion. "I think Daisy deserves most of the credit. She's forgiven my mistakes admirably. She knows you're trying." Holt's expression softened as he looked up at her, one hand resting on Daisy's neck. "That's all any of us can ask." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken awareness. Then Ray called from the house about a problem with one of the calves, breaking the spell. Holt helped Adelaide dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a heartbeat longer than necessary before he stepped back. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "I'd like that," she replied, finding herself reluctant to end their time together. As the promised week drew to a close, Adelaide found herself increasingly conflicted. Her aunt would be worried, and her duty was clear. She should continue to Prescott as planned. Yet the thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Holt, brought an unexpected ache. The evening before the stage was scheduled to resume its route, Adelaide sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset with a heavy heart. Holt joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Thinking about tomorrow?" he asked, handing her a steaming mug. Adelaide nodded, wrapping her fingers around the warm ceramic. "I should be eager to reach my destination after all these delays." "But," he prompted gently, "but I've come to care for this place, for the people here." She glanced at him sideways, afraid to reveal too much. Holt was silent for a long moment, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "The territory has a way of claiming people," he said finally. "Makes them belong to it whether they plan to or not." "Is that what happened to you?" He nodded slowly. "Came for a fresh start. Found something worth building." He turned to face her directly, his blue eyes intent. "Adelaide, I know you have obligations, plans that were made before the flood, but I want you to know that you have a place here if you want it." Her heart quickened at his words, at the carefully restrained emotion behind them. "A place with me." He set his coffee aside, taking her free hand in both of his. "I know it's sudden. We've known each other barely a week, but I feel I can't explain it properly. When I pulled you from that river, something changed, as if I'd found something I didn't even know I was looking for." Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. Part of her thought she should be scandalized by such a declaration after so short an acquaintance. Yet another part, perhaps the truer part, recognized the sincerity in his words, the genuine connection that had formed between them through extraordinary circumstances. "Holt," she began, uncertain how to respond, "I've come to care for you too. More than I should, perhaps, in such a short time." "But my aunt, write to her," he suggested earnestly. "Explain what's happened. Visit her when the weather's more settled. I'm not asking for promises, Adelaide. Just time. Time for whatever this is between us to find its proper shape." The hope in his eyes moved her deeply. Adelaide thought of her original plans to live as a dependent relative in her aunt's home, perhaps eventually to find a suitable marriage among Prescott's limited society. It had seemed a reasonable future when she'd boarded the stage in St. Louis. Now, with Holt's hand warm around hers and the vast Arizona sky stretching above them, that future seemed pallid and constrained. "I'll write to her tonight," Adelaide said softly. "Ask for her understanding." The smile that transformed Holt's face was worth any uncertainty she might feel. He raised her hand to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles that sent a shiver of awareness through her entire body. "Thank you," he said simply. That night, Adelaide penned a careful letter to her aunt, explaining her experience with the flood and her rescue. She described Holt and his ranch in measured terms, expressing her wish to remain at Cedar Creek for a time before making permanent decisions. Judge Harmon would deliver it, along with her apologies for the worry she must have caused. The following morning brought unexpected visitors. Adelaide was hanging laundry in the yard when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. 3 riders approached, led by a stern-faced man in an expensive suit, despite the heat. Holt emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag as he moved to intercept the newcomers. His posture was wary but not hostile as the men dismounted. "Blackburn," he acknowledged, nodding to the suited man. "What brings you out this way? Business, Vance. Always business." The man named Blackburn removed his hat, revealing silver-streaked dark hair and sharp features. His gaze shifted to Adelaide, assessing and somehow intrusive. "Who's the lady?" Holt's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Miss Adelaide Davis, a guest." He turned to her. "Adelaide, this is Victor Blackburn, owns the Silver Spur spread to the north." Adelaide nodded politely, instinctively drawing closer to Holt. Something in Blackburn's manner made her uneasy, a calculating coldness behind his superficial courtesy. "Charmed, Miss Davis." Blackburn offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're new to our little community." "Miss Davis was caught in the flood last week," Holt explained, his tone neutral but watchful. "I was fortunate enough to be able to help." "How gallant," Blackburn remarked, his gaze moving between them speculatively. "Always the hero, aren't you, Vance?" Ray appeared from the direction of the corral, his expression guarded as he approached. "Morning, Mr. Blackburn." Blackburn acknowledged him with a curt nod before returning his attention to Holt. "I'll come to the point. I'm here to renew my offer for your water rights. $5,000, twice what this place is worth." Adelaide felt Holt stiffen beside her. "My answer hasn't changed, Blackburn. The spring on my property isn't for sale." "Be reasonable, man. You're running a modest operation here. That money could set you up properly elsewhere." Blackburn's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel beneath the words. "I'm set up properly right here," Holt replied evenly. "And I have no interest in selling anything to you, water rights or otherwise." The tension between the two men was palpable. Adelaide stood quietly, sensing that this was a continuation of a long-standing conflict. Blackburn's expression hardened. "You should reconsider. The territory's changing. Small outfits like yours are becoming impractical." "Is that a threat? Merely an observation?" Blackburn replaced his hat with deliberate precision. "The offer remains open until the end of the month. After that." He shrugged eloquently. The visitors departed shortly after, leaving a cloud of dust and unease in their wake. Adelaide followed Holt to the corral, where he leaned against the fence, his expression troubled. "What was that about?" she asked quietly. Holt sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Blackburn's the largest rancher in the county. Been buying up smaller spreads for years. My land has a year-round spring that he covets for his cattle operation. And you won't sell. This land is more than just property to me, Adelaide." His gaze swept across the modest ranch, the mountains beyond. "It's everything I've built since the war. My second chance." He looked at her directly, his eyes intense. "And now, perhaps, our chance." The simple declaration, with its inclusion of her in his vision of the future, touched Adelaide deeply. She placed her hand over his on the fence rail. "Then we'll protect it together." Something shifted in Holt's expression, surprise followed by a warmth that transformed his features. Without warning, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, questioning, but when Adelaide responded, the kiss deepened, becoming an affirmation of the connection growing between them. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Holt rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't plan that," he admitted with a rueful smile. "I'm glad you didn't wait for a plan," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Adelaide's life. She wrote regularly to her aunt, who responded with initial concern that gradually gave way to cautious approval, as Adelaide's letters described her growing attachment to both the territory and to Holt. Life on the ranch settled into a pattern that suited them both. Adelaide took charge of the household, bringing order and comfort to spaces that had been merely functional before her arrival. Holt continued teaching her to ride, and soon she was accompanying him on his daily rounds of the property, learning the rhythms and requirements of ranch life. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. Holt revealed more of himself, his experiences during the war that had left him both physically and emotionally scarred, his dreams for the ranch, his hopes for their future together. Adelaide shared her own past the sheltered but loving upbringing in St. Louis, her parents' long illness and death, her fears and aspirations. In the evenings, they would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence between them, Holt's arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. These quiet moments, Adelaide thought, were perhaps when she loved him most, when words were unnecessary, and their connection spoke for itself. The physical aspect of their relationship remained restrained, limited to increasingly passionate kisses and embraces. Both recognized the impropriety of their living arrangement by conventional standards, but the isolation of ranch life and the understanding of neighbors like Mrs. Jenkins provided a buffer against gossip. "You'll marry the girl, of course," Ray said bluntly one morning when he and Holt were checking fence lines out of Adelaide's hearing. Holt straightened from his work, wiping sweat from his brow. "If she'll have me," he replied simply. The older man snorted. "Any fool can see she's smitten. Question is when, not if." "Soon," Holt said, his gaze drifting toward the distant ranch house where Adelaide would be going about her morning tasks. "I'm having my mother's ring sent from California." The threat posed by Blackburn remained a shadow over their happiness. Though the rancher made no further direct approaches after his deadline passed, there were troubling incidents. A section of fence mysteriously cut, allowing cattle to stray. Rumors in town that Holt was in financial difficulty. A veiled warning from the bank manager about reconsidering his options. "He's trying to pressure you," Adelaide observed after hearing about the latest incident, a confrontation between one of their hands and Blackburn's men over straying cattle. Holt nodded grimly. "Blackburn doesn't take rejection well. He's used to getting what he wants. What can we do?" "Stand our ground," he replied, his expression determined. "The law's on our side, even if Blackburn has friends in high places." The situation came to a head in early summer, nearly 3 months after Adelaide's arrival at the ranch. A prolonged dry spell had parched the landscape, making water even more precious and Holt's spring an even more desirable asset. They were returning from town one afternoon, the wagon loaded with supplies, when they saw the smoke. Dark plumes rose from the direction of the ranch, visible miles away across the valley. "No," Holt breathed, his face draining of color. He slapped the reins against the horses' backs, urging them to greater speed. As they crested the final rise, the devastating scene came into full view. The barn was engulfed in flames, the fire so intense that approaching was impossible. The ranch hands were working desperately to prevent the blaze from spreading to the house, forming a bucket line from the well. Ray directed their efforts, his face streaked with soot and grim determination. Holt leaped from the wagon before it fully stopped, racing to join the firefighting effort. Adelaide followed, her heart in her throat as she took in the destruction. "What happened?" she asked Ray, taking her place in the bucket line. "No accident," the foreman replied tersely. 2 riders seen leaving just before it started. Wore silver spur brands. The implication was clear. Blackburn had escalated from pressure to outright destruction. The knowledge sent a chill through Adelaide despite the heat of the flames. They fought the fire until nightfall, managing to save the house and one small outbuilding, but the barn was a complete loss. With it went stored hay, tools and tack accumulated over years of careful management. The financial blow was significant, but the message behind the destruction was even more disturbing. Later, exhausted and soot-stained, they gathered in the kitchen. Holt's expression was harder than Adelaide had ever seen it, his blue eyes like ice as he listened to Ray's full account of what had happened. "This ends now," he said when Ray finished, his voice dangerously quiet. "I won't have my people threatened, my property destroyed." "What are you going to do?" Adelaide asked, concerned by the cold anger in his voice. "First, I'm going to the sheriff with what we know. If he won't act, I'll take it to the judge." Holt's hand closed into a fist on the table. "Blackburn's gone too far this time. And if legal means don't work." Ray asked what Adelaide dared not. Holt's gaze met his foreman's. "Then we'll deal with it another way." That night, Adelaide found Holt standing amid the smoldering ruins of the barn, his figure silhouetted against the moonlight. She approached quietly, slipping her hand into his. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He turned to her, the anger in his eyes softening at her presence. "I brought you into this, put you in danger." "You didn't bring me anywhere," she corrected gently. "I chose to stay. I choose to be with you, Holt, whatever comes." He drew her into his arms, holding her as if she might vanish. "I nearly lost you once to that flood. I can't risk losing you again." "You won't," she promised, raising a hand to his face. "We'll face this together." In the silver moonlight, among the ashes of what had been destroyed, Holt lowered himself to one knee, taking both her hands in his. "I had a plan," he said ruefully. "A proper proposal with my mother's ring, which is still on its way from California. But tonight has shown me that waiting for perfect moments is a luxury we might not have." His voice grew more serious. "Adelaide Davis, I love you. Will you marry me? Be my partner in whatever comes." Tears welled in Adelaide's eyes, not of sorrow but of a joy so intense it was almost painful. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Holt Vance, I will marry you." He rose and kissed her then, a kiss that contained all the passion, fear, and hope that had built between them over the months since he'd pulled her from the floodwaters. In that moment, amid destruction, they affirmed life and a future together, whatever challenges it might hold. The following day, Holt rode to town to file a formal complaint against Blackburn with the sheriff. Adelaide remained at the ranch, helping Ray and the hands begin the process of clearing the burned ruins in preparation for rebuilding. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds were building over the mountains, promising the first substantial rain in weeks. Adelaide was hanging laundry, keeping one eye on the approaching storm, when she heard riders approaching. Expecting Holt's return, she turned with a smile that quickly faded. Victor Blackburn dismounted in the yard, flanked by two hard-faced men. His expression was pleasant, almost sympathetic as he surveyed the burned remains of the barn. "Miss Davis," he greeted her, removing his hat. "Such a tragedy. Fires are always a risk in this dry season." Adelaide stiffened, fear mingling with anger. "Mr. Blackburn, Holt isn't here. I know." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I saw him in town, making quite a scene with Sheriff Miller. Most unfortunate, these baseless accusations." "Not so baseless when your men were seen starting the fire," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. Blackburn's expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into false concern. "My dear Miss Davis, you've been misled. I came to offer assistance, neighbor helping neighbor in a time of need. We don't need your kind of help." Thunder rumbled in the distance as the storm clouds darkened the sky. Blackburn glanced upward before returning his attention to Adelaide. "I think you do. Vance is finished here. This little incident is just the beginning if he continues his stubbornness." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You seem like a sensible woman. Convince him to accept my offer, for his sake, for yours." Adelaide held her ground, though every instinct urged her to retreat from this dangerous man. "The answer remains no, Mr. Blackburn. This land is not for sale, not the water rights, not any part of it." Anger flashed across Blackburn's face, quickly controlled but revealing the violence beneath his civilized veneer. "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake was thinking you could intimidate us into submission," she retorted, surprising herself with her boldness. The first fat raindrops began to fall as Blackburn studied her with cold calculation. "You've got spirit, Miss Davis. I admire that. But spirit won't rebuild that barn or protect what remains of this pitiful ranch." Before Adelaide could respond, Ray emerged from the house, shotgun in hand. He didn't aim it directly at the visitors, but his meaning was clear. "Think you've said your piece, Mr. Blackburn," he stated flatly. "Best be on your way before this weather turns nasty." For a tense moment, it seemed Blackburn might challenge the implicit threat. Then he smiled thinly, replacing his hat with deliberate care. Indeed, wouldn't want to be caught in a cloudburst. He mounted his horse, looking down at Adelaide with an expression that sent a chill through her despite the warm air. "This isn't over, Miss Davis. Not by a long shot." As the unwelcome visitors rode away, the skies opened in earnest, rain pouring down in sheets that quickly turned the yard to mud. Adelaide and Ray retreated to the porch, watching the downpour. "You handled him well," Ray commented, setting the shotgun aside. Adelaide's hands trembled now that the confrontation was over. "He's dangerous." "Yes, he is." Ray's weathered face was grim. "But so is Holt when pushed too far. And Blackburn's doing a mighty fine job of pushing." The rain continued unabated as they waited for Holt's return. What had been a welcome relief from the dry spell soon became concerning as the intensity of the storm increased. Wind lashed the ranch house, driving rain horizontally against the windows. In the distance, lightning split the sky, followed almost immediately by deafening thunder. "Flash flood weather," Ray muttered, peering anxiously into the deluge. "Hope Holt's found shelter somewhere." The words sent a jolt of fear through Adelaide. The memory of her own experience with the flood was still vivid, the terrifying power of the water, the certainty that death was imminent. The thought of Holt caught in similar circumstances was unbearable. As the afternoon wore on with no sign of his return, her anxiety grew. The rain showed no signs of abating. If anything, it intensified. By early evening, the normally dry wash that crossed the property was a raging torrent, and the road to town would be impassable in several places. "He'll have stayed in town," Ray assured her, seeing her worry. "Holt knows these storms. He wouldn't try to cross flowing washes." Adelaide nodded, trying to take comfort in the foreman's words, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Holt had promised to return by nightfall, and he was a man who kept his promises. They ate a subdued dinner, the constant drumming of rain on the roof and the occasional crash of thunder making conversation difficult. Afterward, Adelaide paced the small confines of the main room, pausing occasionally to peer out the windows into the rain-lashed darkness. It was nearly midnight when they heard it, the distant sound of a horse's whinny, barely audible above the storm. Adelaide was at the door before Ray could stop her, flinging it open to peer into the night. A figure on horseback materialized from the darkness, slumped forward in the saddle. Even through the curtain of rain, Adelaide recognized Thunder's distinctive white blaze. The horse approached the house on his own accord, his rider apparently unable to guide him. "Holt!" Adelaide cried, rushing out into the downpour without hesitation. Thunder halted at the sound of her voice, standing exhausted and trembling as Ray and Adelaide reached him. Holt was conscious but barely, his face pale beneath a mask of mud and blood from a gash at his temple. "Ambushed," he managed as they helped him from the saddle. On the way back, washed-out road. Between them they supported Holt into the house. His clothes were sodden, his body chilled despite the summer night. Once inside, Ray helped him to a chair near the fire while Adelaide quickly gathered medical supplies and towels. "What happened?" she asked, gently cleaning the wound on his temple. Holt winced at her touch but remained still. Sheriff wouldn't help, said there wasn't enough evidence. His voice was rough with exhaustion and pain. On the way back, found the main road washed out, took the high trail instead. He paused, gathering strength before continuing. 2 of Blackburn's men were waiting. Shot went wide, spooked thunder. We went down the embankment. Adelaide's hands stilled momentarily, horror at the near miss making her stomach clench. They tried to kill you. Might have succeeded if Thunder hadn't found his way back to the trail. Holt captured her hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his condition. Blackburn's made his move. Next time he won't miss. Ray, who had been checking Holt for other injuries, straightened with a grim expression. What now, boss? Holt's eyes, though pained, were determined. We fight back. Legally, if possible. Other ways, if necessary. Adelaide finished bandaging his head wound, her movements gentle but her mind racing with fear and resolve. The man she loved had nearly been murdered. The future they planned together had almost been erased in a moment of violence disguised as accident. Something hardened within her a determination that matched Holt's own. "First, you rest," she said firmly. "Tomorrow, we'll plan." Rest proved elusive for all of them. The storm continued through the night, rain hammering against the roof and windows. Holt, despite Adelaide's protests, refused to take the bed, settling instead on a pallet near the fire where he could keep watch. His pistol remained within easy reach, a grim reminder of the danger they faced. Adelaide dozed fitfully in a chair nearby, unwilling to leave him. Each time she woke, she found his eyes open, watching the door or the windows, listening to sounds beyond the storm's fury. Morning brought a temporary respite from the rain, though heavy clouds still hung low over the mountains. Holt, despite the pain that lined his face, insisted on checking the property for storm damage. "The creek will have risen," he explained as Adelaide helped him into his coat. "Need to make sure the cattle haven't been stranded." "You should be resting," she argued, concern evident in her voice. He smiled slightly, touching her cheek with gentle fingers. "I'll rest when our home is secure. Our home." The simple phrase warmed Adelaide despite her worry. This place had indeed become her home, not just the ranch house with its practical furnishings and the improvements she'd made, but the land itself, the rhythm of days measured by sunrise and sunset, the connection to something larger and more enduring than the society life she'd left behind. While Holt and Ray rode out to check the cattle, Adelaide remained at the ranch, keeping watch with a loaded rifle nearby. The previous day's threats and the night's violence had awakened a protective fierceness in her that would have surprised her former self. By mid-morning, the clouds were breaking, allowing shafts of sunlight to penetrate. The air felt cleansed, the landscape refreshed by the storm's violence. Adelaide was hanging the last of the bedding to air on the porch rail when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. This time, it wasn't Blackburn or his men. Judge Harmon dismounted in the yard, accompanied by a serious-looking man wearing a badge that identified him as a federal marshal. Adelaide greeted them with cautious relief. "Judge Harmon, this is an unexpected visit." The judge removed his hat, his expression grave. "Miss Davis, is Holt available? What we have to discuss concerns him directly. He's checking on the cattle after the storm, should return soon." She gestured toward the house. "Please come inside, I can offer coffee." Once settled in the main room, the judge introduced his companion. "This is Marshal James Thornton. He's been investigating certain irregularities in land transfers throughout the territory." The marshal nodded politely. "Madam, Judge Harmon mentioned your situation here. It may connect to my broader investigation." Adelaide poured coffee for their visitors, her mind racing with possibilities. "Connection? How so?" I've been tracking a pattern of land acquisitions, some legal, many questionable across several counties, Thornton explained. The same methods appear repeatedly. Pressure tactics, mysterious accidents, threats followed by suspiciously timely offers of purchase. Blackburn, Adelaide said, the pieces falling into place. The marshal nodded. He's one player in a larger scheme. There are interests back east, railroad and mining companies primarily looking to control key water sources and potential rights of way. They operate through local agents like Blackburn. Judge Harmon leaned forward, his expression intent. What happened here yesterday, Adelaide? There are rumors in town about a confrontation, and Holt didn't return to town as expected. Adelaide hesitated only briefly before relating the events of the previous day, Blackburn's visit and thinly veiled threats, Holt's ambush on the trail, the attempted murder disguised as an accident of nature. The marshal listened carefully, occasionally making notes. When she finished, he exchanged a significant look with the judge. "This matches the pattern exactly," Thornton said, "and it provides the concrete evidence we've been lacking. A direct attempt on Vance's life crosses the line from civil dispute to federal crime." The sound of horses outside interrupted their conversation. Moments later, Holt entered, stopping short at the sight of the unexpected visitors. Despite his obvious surprise, he greeted them with composed courtesy. "Judge, Marshal." He moved to stand beside Adelaide, his presence both protective and seeking reassurance. "To what do we owe this visit?" As the judge explained their purpose, Adelaide watched the tension gradually ease from Holt's shoulders. The knowledge that they had allies, that Blackburn's actions were part of a larger pattern being investigated by federal authorities, visibly relieved him. "We'll need your formal statement," Marshal Thornton said when the explanation was complete. "Yours too, Miss Davis." "With those and the evidence we've already gathered, we can move against Blackburn and his associates." "Will it be enough?" Holt asked, the pragmatic rancher evident in his cautious response. "Blackburn has influence in these parts. His backers are already under investigation in Washington," the marshal replied. "Once they learn that, I suspect his local support will evaporate quickly." The conversation continued, details of the investigation explained, plans made for formal statements to be taken the following day in town. Through it all, Adelaide remained close to Holt, drawing and giving strength through their connection. When the visitors departed, promising to return with additional marshals to ensure their safety, Holt pulled Adelaide into his arms, holding her as if he never intended to let go. "It's almost over," she murmured against his chest. He nodded, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Thanks to you. Your courage with Blackburn, your clear thinking afterward, you may have saved more than just our ranch." "We saved it together," she corrected gently. "As we'll build our future together." The next weeks brought dramatic changes. Marshal Thornton, armed with statements from Holt, Adelaide, and other ranchers who had faced similar pressure tactics, moved against Blackburn with federal authority. The rancher was arrested, his operation investigated thoroughly, revealing connections to Eastern interests that had been systematically attempting to control water rights throughout the territory. The legal proceedings would take months, but the immediate threat to Holt's ranch and to their lives was removed. With that shadow lifted, they could turn their attention to rebuilding what had been destroyed and planning their future. On a clear September morning, with the first hint of autumn crispness in the air, Adelaide Davis became Adelaide Vance, in a simple ceremony performed by Judge Harmon in the newly rebuilt barn. The structure, larger and sturdier than its predecessor, had been raised with the help of neighboring ranchers who had also suffered under Blackburn's tactics, and now celebrated his downfall. Mrs. Jenkins had helped Adelaide fashion a wedding dress from fine white cotton, ordered specially from Phoenix, adorned with lace from her own wedding gown. Holt, standing tall and proud in his best shirt and string tie, watched his bride approach with an expression of wonder and devotion that needed no words. "Never thought I'd see the day," Ray commented gruffly as he stood as witness. "This place needed a woman's touch, and yours specifically, Mrs. Vance." The celebration afterward was a community affair, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by every family for miles around. Children played, adults danced to fiddle music, and the newly married couple moved through it all in a haze of happiness that seemed almost unreal after the dangers they had faced. As evening approached, their guests gradually departed, leaving the ranch peaceful once more. Holt led Adelaide to the corral, where Thunder and Daisy stood saddled and waiting. "A wedding present," he explained, helping her mount. "Something I've been wanting to show you." They rode as the sun began its descent, following a trail that wound upward through pine-scented forest to a ridge overlooking the entire valley. Below them, their ranch lay like a miniature village, the new barn gleaming in the late light, the house a symbol of the home they had defended and would now share fully as husband and wife. "It's beautiful," Adelaide breathed, taking in the panoramic view. "I came here often during my first years," Holt said, dismounting and helping her down beside him, "when the work seemed overwhelming or the loneliness too much." He took her hands in his expression solemn yet joyful. "I never imagined then that I'd bring my wife here someday. That I'd have someone to share not just the view, but everything else as well." Adelaide leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder as they watched the sun sink toward the horizon. "When that flood swept me away, I thought it was the end," she said softly. "I never dreamed it was actually the beginning of us, of this life we'll build together." Holt's arm tightened around her waist. "I'll never forget the sight of you in that water, so brave even in the face of death. You had my heart from that moment, though I didn't fully understand it then." They stood together as the sun disappeared, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The first stars appeared, bright pinpoints in the deepening blue. Below them, lights winked on in the ranch house, their home, the center of the life they would create together. "Ready to go back?" Holt asked eventually, his voice low. Adelaide turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face in the gathering darkness. "Yes," she whispered. "Take me home." They rode back down the trail, the horses sure-footed even in the fading light. The ranch house glowed warm and welcoming as they approached, so different from the utilitarian structure Adelaide had first encountered months before. Now, it represented everything they had fought for and won: security, belonging, a future built on love that had been born in the most unlikely of circumstances. As Holt lifted her from the saddle and carried her across the threshold, Adelaide felt a sense of rightness so profound it brought tears to her eyes. From the raging floodwaters that had nearly claimed her life to this moment of perfect joy, the journey had been dangerous, unexpected, and ultimately more rewarding than anything she could have imagined. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance," Holt murmured as he set her gently on her feet inside their door. Adelaide smiled up at him, her heart full to overflowing. "I am home," she replied simply. "Wherever you are, that's where I belong." In the years that followed, the Vance ranch prospered and grew. The spring that Victor Blackburn had coveted became the lifeblood of an expanding operation that included not only cattle, but also the horses that were Holt's passion. Their reputation for quality spread throughout the territory, bringing buyers from as far as California and Texas. The house expanded as well, with additions that reflected their growing family. A son, William, arrived in their second year of marriage, followed by a daughter, Catherine, 18 months later. A third child, Joseph, completed their family 3 years after that. The children grew strong and confident in the freedom of ranch life, learning early the values of hard work, honesty, and loyalty that their parents exemplified. Adelaide never regretted her decision to stay in the Arizona Territory. The aunt who had expected her in Prescott eventually came to visit, and was so charmed by the ranch and the obvious happiness of her niece that she became a regular visitor, eventually moving to a small house in Cedar Creek when traveling became too difficult for her. The town itself grew modestly as the territory developed, but never lost its frontier character. Holt served several terms as county commissioner, helping to shape policies that protected small ranchers and farmers from the kind of predatory practices Blackburn had employed. On their 20th anniversary, Holt took Adelaide back to the ridge where they had watched the sunset on their wedding day. The view had changed, somewhat more ranches dotted the valley. The town was larger, their own property more extensive, but the essential beauty remained unchanged. "Any regrets?" he asked as they sat side by side, older now but still deeply connected. Adelaide considered the question seriously before shaking her head. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step from that terrible flood to this moment brought me exactly where I was meant to be." Holt took her hand, his touch as reassuring and loving as it had been on that first day when he pulled her from the raging waters. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what? For staying. For believing in what we could build together. For making a life with me that's better than anything I could have imagined." Adelaide leaned against him, watching the sun begin its descent in a display as glorious as it had been 2 decades earlier. "The river tried to take me," she said softly, "but you were stronger. You always have been." As twilight settled over the land they both loved, they remained on the ridge, two people whose lives had been joined by chance and sustained by choice, whose love had been forged in danger and had endured through all the seasons of their shared life. The flash flood that had nearly ended Adelaide's life had instead given her everything she cherished, a love that ran as deep and powerful as the waters that had brought them together. A family that was her greatest joy, and a home in this wild, beautiful land that had claimed her heart as surely as the man who had risked everything to save her.